Welcome to our deep dive into the wild world of aviation regulations.
Yeah.
You sent over some pretty interesting excerpts from Chapter 2 of the AMP Handbook.pdf,
Uh-huh.
and we're ready to jump right in.
Great.
Get ready for a behind-the-scenes peek at how aircraft are designed and built,
Yeah.
and most importantly, how they're kept safe up in the air.
Well, what's really fascinating is that the FAA, they didn't actually define airworthy, in a regulation until pretty recently.
Really? I would have thought such a fundamental concept would have been spelled out right from the beginning.
Yeah, you'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't until 2024
Hmm.
that they actually put it in black and white
Oh, wow.
in 14 CFR Part 3.
Okay.
Before that,
Mm.
the whole concept of airworthiness was kind of scattered
Yeah.
across different regulations,
Yeah.
which could make things a little tricky to figure out.
I bet. So how did they finally define airworthy?
Well, basically,
Yeah.
it means that the aircraft, sticks to its approved design
Right.
and is in a condition where it can operate safely.
Okay.
So it's not just about building it, right? It's
Yeah.
about making sure that airworthiness stays,
Mm.
throughout its entire life.
Oh, that's interesting.
And this is where the two main areas of airworthiness come in. You've got original and recurrent.
Okay.
Original airworthiness basically covers everything about getting a brand new aircraft, certified to fly.
Right.
While recurrent airworthiness focuses on keeping those existing aircraft safe and, well, airworthy.
That makes sense. I guess it's kind of like a car. You need to follow the manufacturer's recommendations and
Yeah.
keep up with the maintenance.
Exactly.
So what are the key regulations that make this whole airworthiness system work?
Oh, well, there are three main regulations that you really want to get to know.
Okay.
14 CFR Part 21.
Okay.
That one covers the procedures for certifying products and parts.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got 14 CFR Part 43,
Okay.
which is all about maintenance.
Yeah.
And lastly, 14 CFR Part 91,
Okay.
which dives into general operating and flight rules.
Gotcha. So these three regulations are the bedrock of aviation safety.
You could say that. They're all connected. And most other airworthiness regulations end up linking back to one of these big three.
Interesting. The excerpts you sent over mention parts 23, 25, 27, and 29.
Yeah.
What do those cover?
Think of those as the blueprints for different types of aircraft.
Okay.
Parts 23 and 25 set the standards for airplanes,
Mm-hmm.
while parts 27 and 29 cover rotorcraft.
Okay.
So your helicopters, they look
Yeah.
at design, weight, how many passengers they can carry,
Hmm.
and tons of other factors specific to each category.
So different aircraft, different rules.
You got it. A small two-seater plane obviously has different design and safety needs compared to a huge passenger jet, right?
Yeah, of course.
These regulations take those differences into account.
That makes sense. What about older aircraft, though? Do they have to meet all the latest standards?
That's a great question. In most cases, aircraft built before regulation changes, they're kind of grandfathered in, meaning they don't always have to meet those brand new requirements,
Oh, interesting.
which could mean some pretty expensive modifications.
Right. But I'm sure there are exceptions. What if a safety issue pops up after an aircraft is already flying around?
Exactly. That's where those airworthiness directives come in, or ADs for short.
Okay.
They're basically the FAA's way of addressing any safety concerns that come up unexpectedly.
Mm.
And they're legally enforceable,
Oh, wow.
so everyone has to follow them.
So it's like safety recalls for aircraft.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Okay.
An AD might call for specific inspections,
Uh-huh.
repairs, or even modifications to fix a safety problem.
Hmm.
They can come out as notices of proposed rulemaking, or NPRMs,
Okay.
final rules,
Uh-huh.
or even emergency ADs if they need action,
Yeah.
right away.
That makes sense.
Hmm.
Now, getting back to Part 43 for a sec,
Yeah.
it covers maintenance, which seems like a huge topic.
Oh, it is.
So what are some key things I should know about?
Part 43 is super detailed.
I bet you.
But one of the most important things to remember is the difference between major and minor repairs and alterations.
Okay.
Minor repairs and alterations are pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Think about swapping out worn brake pads with the same exact kind of.
Right.
Major repairs and alterations, though,
Yeah.
those can really change an aircraft's design,
Mm.
weight and balance,
Mm-hmm.
or even how it performs.
Oh, wow.
So things like putting in a new engine
Yeah.
or changing the wings, those would be considered major.
Gotcha. And because of the potential safety impact, major repairs and alterations need approved data to back up the work. Right.
Exactly. That data might come from airworthiness directives,
Hmm.
supplemental type certificates,
Okay.
or the aircraft's type certificate data sheet.
Okay.
It's all about making sure any big changes are checked out thoroughly.
Makes sense. What happens if there's no approved data for a specific repair or alteration, though?
Well, that's when a field approval comes in.
Hmm.
That lets mechanics come up with a unique solution for a specific situation.
Okay.
They send a detailed request to the FAA,
Yeah.
laying out all the technical reasons.
Hmm.
And if the FAA gives the thumbs up,
Mm-hmm.
the mechanic can go ahead with the work.
So it's like a way to ensure safety while also being flexible.
Exactly. It acknowledges that not every fix is going to have like a pre-approved solution.
Right. Let's move on to inspections. What types of inspections are there and how often do they need to happen?
Inspections are super important for keeping that airworthiness up to par.
Yeah.
You've got your annual inspections,
Okay.
which are needed for most general aviation aircraft,
Uh-huh.
and 100-hour inspections,
Okay.
which apply to aircraft that are used for hire,
Yeah.
like for flight instruction.
Right. So what's the difference between those two?
The main difference is what triggers the inspection.
Okay.
Either 12 calendar months passing
Mm-hmm.
or the aircraft racking up 100 hours of flight time.
Makes sense. And then there are those progressive inspections, right?
Yeah, those break down the big annual inspection into smaller tasks
Uh-huh.
that you can spread out over time.
Okay.
This helps minimize downtime for the aircraft,
Right.
keeping it in the air more often.
So progressive inspections are kind of a preventative maintenance strategy?
Exactly.
Or-
It's all about spotting potential problems
Uh-huh.
and tackling them before they become big headaches.
I like it. So we've got annual,
Yeah.
100-hour, and progressive inspections. Are there any other types of inspection programs I should know about?
Yes.
Mm.
There are continuous airworthiness inspection programs,
Okay.
or CAIPs,
Hmm.
used by larger carriers like airlines.
Mm-hmm.
These programs offer a more complete and structured approach to maintenance,
Mm-hmm.
tailored to their specific operations.
Makes sense.
And for Part 135 operators,
Right.
those are your commuter and on-demand flights,
Yeah.
you have approved aircraft inspection programs, or AAIPs,
Gotcha.
which let them customize inspection programs with the FAA's approval.
It sounds like the FAA has a lot of options for making sure aircraft are inspected thoroughly and regularly.
Yep.
They really understand the different needs of the industry.
Absolutely. It's about finding the most effective way to maintain airworthiness while minimizing downtime
Uh-huh.
and keeping disruptions to operations to a minimum.
Right. Besides the big three parts, 21, 43, and 91, you mentioned parts 45, 47, and 65 earlier.
I did.
Can you give me a quick overview of what they cover?
Parts 45 and 47 are all about aircraft identification and registration.
Okay.
Part 45 focuses on those N numbers you see on the tail of U.S. aircraft,
Right.
making sure they're displayed correctly
Uh-huh.
and have all the required info.
Makes sense.
Part 47 handles aircraft registration,
Okay.
establishing legal ownership,
Gotcha.
and outlining all the necessary procedures.
So basically the paperwork side of owning an aircraft. What about part 65?
Part 65 is all about the people who keep the aviation world turning behind the scenes. Your mechanics,
Yeah.
repairmen, parachute riggers, dispatchers, even air traffic controllers.
Right.
It covers their certification requirements
Okay.
and makes sure they've got the skills and knowledge to do their jobs safely and effectively.
So they're the unsung heroes making sure everything runs smoothly behind the scenes.
Absolutely. Their expertise is key for maintaining safety and efficiency up in the air.
It's easy to forget about everyone besides the pilots. Now, shifting gears a bit, Part 91 mainly deals with operating and flight rules.
Right.
But the excerpts I sent mentioned that maintenance technicians should be aware of certain sections.
Uh-huh.
Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, you're right. Part 91 is mostly for pilots,
Yeah.
but there are definitely parts that are relevant to maintenance. For example,
Yeah.
Section 91.207 deals with emergency locator transmitters, or ELTs.
Okay.
These devices send out a signal if an aircraft crashes,
Mm-hmm.
helping rescuers find it.
Right.
So maintenance technicians need to know the rules about inspecting,
Mm-hmm.
testing,
Yeah.
and replacing those ELTs
Oh,
to make sure they work properly in an emergency.
gotcha. What else in Part 91 is relevant for maintenance folks?
Subpart E of Part 91.
Okay.
That one focuses on the owner or operator's responsibility for maintenance. The mechanic does the actual work,
Right.
but ultimately the owner is responsible for making sure the aircraft is maintained correctly
Uh-huh.
and follows all the applicable ADs.
Makes sense.
There are also sections about required inspections,
Okay.
keeping those maintenance records,
Right.
and even specifics about altimeter and transponder tests.
So even though Part 91 is mainly about operating rules, there's a lot of overlap with the maintenance side.
Exactly. It really highlights how interconnected everything is in aviation.
Yeah.
You can't really understand one part without knowing a bit about the others.
Okay, so we've talked about the main regulations for aircraft design, building, and maintenance.
Uh-huh.
But the excerpts also mention other things like advisory circulars and civil air regulations.
Yeah.
Are those still relevant today?
They can be, especially when you're working with older aircraft.
Right.
Advisory circulars, or ACs,
Mm-hmm.
basically offer guidance on how to comply with regulations.
Okay.
And they can be really helpful for understanding those sometimes complex rules.
So they're like the FAA's interpretation of the regulations.
Yeah, kind of like that.
Oh.
They help clarify things.
Right. What about those civil air regulations or CARs? Aren't those pretty old?
They are. Cars were around before the current federal aviation regulations.
Hmm.
And while they don't apply to new aircraft,
Right.
they can still be relevant for those older planes
Okay.
that were certified under those earlier standards.
So you might need to dust off those old cars when you're working on a vintage aircraft.
Exactly. It's like
Yeah.
restoring a classic car.
Yeah.
You need to understand those original specs and standards
Mhm.
to keep it authentic and safe.
Makes sense. Now, there's one more topic from this excerpts that caught my eye.
Mm-hmm.
Suspected unapproved parts, or SUPs.
Ah, yes.
Can you tell me more about those?
SUPs are a big deal in aviation maintenance.
I bet.
There are 4 types of aircraft parts.
Oh, okay.
Good parts with good paperwork, which is the ideal.
Right.
Good parts with bad paperwork.
Hmm.
Bad parts with good paperwork, but it's fake. And then bad parts with bad paperwork.
Yikes.
That last one is definitely not what you want.
No kidding.
Those middle 2 categories,
Yeah.
good parts with bad paperwork and bad parts with good paperwork,
Mhm.
those are what we call SUPs.
So it's all about being careful and making sure the parts you're using are legit and have the right paperwork.
Exactly. If a part looks iffy
Uh-huh.
or the paperwork seems off,
Yeah.
that's a red flag,
Mhm.
and you need to investigate further.
Right. And what if you do find a SUP?
It's crucial to report it to the FAA right away.
Okay.
They have a specific process for this,
Gotcha.
outlined in AC 2129,
Okay.
which is all about detecting and reporting these potentially dangerous parts.
So identifying and reporting SUPs is a big part of keeping aviation safe. It's not just about following the rules,
Right.
but also about being aware of potential risks and taking steps to avoid them.
Exactly. It's about being a responsible member of the aviation maintenance community
Yeah.
and doing your part to keep the sky safe.
Okay, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Uh-huh.
there's one more crucial area I want to touch on: forms and records.
Yeah.
The excerpts mentioned FAA Form 337. What's that form all about?
Form 337.
Yeah.
That's a key document for recording major repairs and alterations.
Mm.
It provides a detailed account of what work was done,
Uh-huh.
who did it,
Okay.
and what approved data was used.
Mm.
It's basically the official paper trail for any significant work done on an aircraft,
Okay.
ensuring everything's transparent and accountable.
So if I'm swapping out an engine or putting in a new avionics system, I need to fill out a Form 337.
You got it. It's super important for maintaining a complete maintenance history
And
and making sure the work meets all those regulatory requirements.
right. So Form 337 is for major repairs and alterations. Are there other kinds of airworthiness certificates?
There are 2 main types: standard airworthiness certificates
Okay.
and special airworthiness certificates.
Mm.
The standard airworthiness certificate, which is issued on FAA Form 8102,
Okay.
that's the most common one.
Uh-huh.
It shows that the aircraft matches its type design
Right.
and is in a safe condition for flying.
It's like the FAA's stamp of approval for airworthiness.
Exactly. Then you have the special airworthiness certificate.
Okay.
That one is issued on FAA Form 8137.
Gotcha.
And it's for aircraft that don't fit into those standard categories,
Mhm.
like experimental aircraft or vintage planes with major modifications.
So a special airworthiness certificate acknowledges that those aircraft are unique,
Right.
but still ensures they meet the necessary safety standards.
Exactly. It's the FAA's way of saying,
Mm,
okay, we know this aircraft is different, but it's still safe to fly under these conditions.
I like it. What about aircraft registration? What forms are involved in that?
To register an aircraft in the U.S.,
Yeah.
you use FAA Form 8051, the aircraft registration application.
Okay.
And once that's approved,
Uh-huh.
the FAA issues an official certificate of aircraft registration,
Okay.
Form 8053.
Gotcha.
These documents,
Yeah.
along with the airworthiness certificate,
Right.
are essential for proving ownership and airworthiness.
So kind of like a car's registration and title.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Got to keep those documents safe and accessible.
Okay. Now, what about those day-to-day maintenance records?
Yeah.
Is there a specific form for those?
For those regular maintenance logs,
Mm-hmm.
the FAA doesn't actually require a specific form.
Oh, interesting.
Most mechanics and repair stations just use commercially available logbooks
Okay.
that are made to capture all the necessary info.
So it's more about following those content guidelines than using a specific form.
Precisely. The focus is on creating a complete and accurate record of all the aircraft's maintenance.
What kind of information needs to be in those maintenance log entries?
Each entry needs the date,
Okay.
a detailed description of the work done, the name and certification number of the person who did the work,
Yeah.
and their signature.
Okay.
And you also need the signature of the person who inspected the work
Right.
and said the aircraft is good to fly again.
So those signatures are like proof that qualified people have checked the work.
Exactly. Those signatures are super important in aviation.
Now, with technology moving so fast, are we seeing more electronic record keeping in aviation maintenance?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
More and more maintenance places are ditching those paper logs
Yeah.
and switching to electronic record-keeping systems. They have so many benefits.
Okay, like what?
Easier searching, simple backups, and less risk of mistakes or losing paperwork.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It seems like the next logical step for an industry that's all about accuracy and documentation. Right.
What are some important things to think about when choosing an electronic record-keeping system, though?
The biggest thing is making sure the system follows all the FAA regulations,
Okay.
especially those about electronic signatures, data security, and how long you need to keep records.
Right. So it's not just about finding a system with lots of features.
No.
It's about meeting those FAA standards first and foremost.
You also need to think about practicality.
Okay.
Does the system fit into your existing work processes?
Uh-huh.
Can it handle the specific aircraft you work on?
Yeah.
And can it keep track of those critical life-limited parts?
Right. Because making sure those are replaced on time is crucial for safety.
Exactly. So it's about finding a balance between meeting regulations, being practical, and making sure the system is easy for your team to use.
Gotcha. Now, we've talked a lot about maintaining traditional aircraft, but the excerpts also mentioned light sport aircraft, or LSAs.
Yeah.
What makes LSA maintenance different? LSA maintenance is fascinating.
Okay.
It relies heavily on industry standards, especially those developed by ASTM International,
Right.
not just FAA mandates.
So it's more of a collaborative approach.
Exactly. The FAA essentially said, hey, we trust the industry to come up with and maintain appropriate standards for these aircraft.
And that reflects the unique nature of LSAs.
Absolutely. They're usually simpler in design and flown for recreation.
Okay. So the FAA decided to work with the industry to come up with the right standards.
Exactly. It's all about acknowledging the expertise of the people who design, build, and maintain LSAs. And being flexible enough to address their unique needs.
Okay.
So instead of dictating every single detail of maintenance, they decided to let the industry fill in some of those gaps.
So there's more trust placed in the industry to keep things safe and compliant,
Right.
while also giving them the flexibility to handle the specific needs of LSAs.
You got it. However, that doesn't mean it's a free-for-all.
Of course not.
The FAA still oversees everything. And those industry standards, especially from ASTM International, provide a strong framework for keeping things safe and high quality.
It sounds like a system that strikes a good balance between flexibility and accountability. What about the training for LSA maintenance, though? Is that different too?
It is. For traditional aircraft maintenance, you usually need an FAA-issued airframe and power plant mechanic certificate.
Right, an A&P license?
Exactly. But with LSAs, you have the option for task-specific training.
Task-specific training, what does that mean?
So imagine you need to overhaul a certain type of engine.
Okay.
One that's commonly used in LSAs, instead of getting a full A&P license, which covers all kinds of aircraft systems. You could just get training focused on that specific engine.
So it's like specialized training for a particular LSA maintenance task.
Precisely. It's a more streamlined approach that recognizes that LSAs often have simpler systems.
Who provides that task-specific training, though?
That's where things get interesting.
Okay.
The FAA doesn't directly approve or regulate that training for LSA maintenance.
Oh, really?
Yeah, instead, they rely on the aircraft manufacturers or other industry groups to develop and run these training programs.
So they're putting a lot of trust in the industry to make sure people doing LSA maintenance are trained properly.
That's right. Another example of that collaboration in the LSA world.
Okay. What about documentation? Do you still have to fill out detailed FAA forms for every repair or alteration on an LSA?
Nope. The paperwork for LSAs is also simplified.
Hmm.
Remember that FAA Form 337?
The one for major repairs and alterations on a regular aircraft.
Yeah, you don't need that for LSAs.
Oh, wow.
Instead, you just provide a written statement,
Okay.
basically swearing that the aircraft still meets the ASTM standards
Hmm.
after you've done the work.
So it's more about showing compliance with those industry standards.
Exactly. It's a more outcome-focused approach.
Makes sense. Now, here's another interesting thing. Safety directives for LSAs aren't issued by the FAA.
Right.
They come from the aircraft manufacturers themselves, really. So the manufacturers are basically policing themselves.
Not exactly policing, but they do play a bigger role in spotting and fixing any safety issues with their aircraft models.
Yeah, of course. They want to make sure their products are safe.
They have the most in-depth knowledge of how their aircraft are designed and built.
That's true. So how do these manufacturer-issued safety directives work?
They work a lot like the FAA's airworthiness directives.
Yuck.
They outline required inspections, repairs, or modifications to address any specific safety concerns.
Right. And they're just as important to follow as ADs.
Exactly. If you don't comply,
Yeah.
there can be serious consequences.
So it's a different approach, but the goal is the same.
Yeah.
Keep those LSAs safe and airworthy.
Absolutely.
Now let's talk about those all-important maintenance records.
Okay.
We know that more and more of them are electronic.
Yeah.
But what about the rules surrounding them? How long do you have to keep them? And what happens when an aircraft is sold?
That's where 14 CFR Part 91 comes back in,
Okay.
specifically Section 91.417.
Gotcha.
It lays out the rules for maintaining and transferring those maintenance records.
So Part 91 isn't just for pilots. It's like the go-to guide for record keeping for aircraft owners and maintainers.
You got it. It makes a clear difference between temporary and permanent records.
Okay.
Temporary records, like work orders for minor repairs or alterations, you got to keep those until the work is done,
Okay.
inspected and approved.
Right.
Basically ready for the aircraft to fly again.
So you can't just throw those work orders away as soon as you finish a repair.
Nope. You got to hang on to them until a qualified person,
Okay.
like a certified mechanic,
Right.
checks it out and signs off on it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
That closes the loop on that particular task. What about permanent records, though? What are those, and how long do you have to keep them?
Permanent records are the heart of an aircraft's maintenance history. They include those logbook entries that document all the maintenance and inspections, the current status of any life-limited parts,
Okay.
and any forms related to major repairs or alterations.
Right. Basically anything that helps you understand the aircraft's maintenance history.
Exactly. Part 91 says owners have to keep those permanent records as long as they own and fly the aircraft.
So they stay with the aircraft its whole life.
Yep, they're a crucial part of the aircraft's documentation.
What happens when the aircraft is sold?
When you sell an aircraft,
Yeah.
those permanent records go to the new owner.
Oh, okay.
It's like passing on a family heirloom.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of some old object,
Yeah.
it's a detailed story of all the aircraft's maintenance.
That's cool. So the new owner gets a full picture of the aircraft's past,
Yep.
which is super important for making good decisions about taking care of it.
Right. What if the previous owner wants to keep those original records, though? Like for sentimental reasons,
Yeah.
or because they're worried about losing them.
Yeah.
Part 91 allows that, but there's a catch.
What's that?
The previous owner can keep the physical records, but they have to make them available to the new owner, the FAA,
Okay.
or the NTSB if they ask for them.
So it's kind of like a long-term loan.
Yeah.
Making sure those records are accessible.
Exactly. It balances the previous owner's wish to keep those records with the need for transparency,
Right.
and making sure those who need to see the records can actually get to them.
This has been a great look at those SFRs, those historical cams, the ins and outs of electronic record keeping, and how important those maintenance records are.
Definitely.
We've covered a lot, but there's one more thing we need to talk about. The publications that can help us make sense of this whole aviation regulation world and give us valuable guidance on aircraft maintenance.
Those are super helpful.
I bet. So stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Where we'll delve deeper into those special federal aviation regulations, or SFRs. Yeah,
Until then, keep those wings level
you got it.
and those logbooks up to date.
Absolutely.
Welcome back to our deep dive into aviation regulations, We covered a lot in part 1, but there's still so much to unpack. Remember those special federal aviation regulations?
Those SFRs?
Yeah, they sound kind of mysterious.
A little bit, yeah.
Like those bonus tracks you find on an album.
I like that analogy.
So what makes an SFR so special?
Well, think of SFRs as the FAA's way of handling those unique or urgent situations that don't really fit into the regular regulations. They're often for very specific circumstances, and they're usually temporary.
So they're kind of like pop-up regulations for those one-off situations that need a more tailored approach.
Exactly. It gives the FAA some wiggle room to respond to new safety concerns or changes in the industry without having to rewrite the whole rule book.
That makes sense. Can you give me an example of an SFR in action?
Sure. Imagine a new type of aircraft technology comes out.
And the current regulations don't really address its safety concerns. The FAA might issue an SFAR just for that technology, outlining extra requirements or limitations until they can work it into the permanent regulation.
So it lets them stay ahead of the curve and deal with potential safety issues quickly. What about the numbering system for SFARs? It seems different from the regular 14 CFR part numbers.
You're right. SFRs are numbered in order. And those numbers don't have anything to do with the specific regulation they're about. It's just a way to keep track of them in the order they were issued.
So they really are like bonus tracks on an album.
Yeah.
They add something unique and interesting to the whole set of regulations. Now let's go back in time a bit further in aviation history.
Okay.
The excerpts you sent mention civil aeronautics manuals.
CAMs.
Yeah. What were those all about?
The CAMs. Those are like finding those old vinyl records in your grandma's attic.
You'd love that.
A little glimpse into the past of aviation. Back then, before they separated regulations, AIRs, from advisory material, ACs, the CAMs were one big document with both the rules and the guidance.
So they were like the original version of the IRs, but with some extra tips and tricks thrown in?
That's a great way to put it. While they're not used anymore, you might still see references to them when you're researching older aircraft or digging into aviation history.
Makes sense.
They show how those aviation regulations have changed over time.
That's really interesting. Speaking of changes, let's talk more about the digital side of things.
Sure.
We touched on electronic record keeping in part 1. But I'd like to dig a little deeper. What are some key things to keep in mind when picking an electronic record-keeping system for aircraft maintenance?
That's an important question.
Yeah.
Especially with more and more maintenance operations going digital. The top priority is making sure it follows all the FAA rules. The system has to meet their standards for electronic signatures, data security, and record retention.
So it's not just about finding a system that's easy to use or has all the bells and whistles.
Nope. Compliance comes first.
Gotcha. What else should we be thinking about?
Practicality. Does it work well with your current processes?
Yeah.
Can it handle the types of aircraft you work on? And can it keep track of those critical life-limited parts?
Right. Because making sure those are replaced on schedule is so important for safety.
Exactly. And don't forget about backups. What if the power goes out? Or the system crashes?
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know, make sure those maintenance records are protected and easy to get back if you need them.
So choosing an electronic record-keeping system is a big decision.
It is.
You really need to do your research.
Absolutely. It's an investment.
Okay, now let's shift gears and go back to those light sport aircraft.
LSAs.
Yeah. We talked about how LSA maintenance relies a lot on industry consensus standards, especially those from ASTM International. Can you tell me more about what makes those standards unique?
Sure. Remember how the FAA decided that LSAs are a different kind of aircraft?
Yeah.
They're usually simpler.
Right.
And mainly used for fun flying.
Okay.
So instead of laying down the law for every single detail about maintenance, they teamed up with the industry to develop and maintain those standards.
That's a really interesting approach.
It is. It recognizes that the people who design, build, and maintain LSAs, they have a lot of expertise. And it gives them some flexibility to deal with the specific needs of these aircraft.
So how is LSA maintenance regulated differently compared to traditional aircraft?
One big difference is the level of detail for traditional aircraft. The FAA gives you very specific instructions for almost everything, from who can do the work to exactly what paperwork you need. But with LSAs, the FAA takes a step back. And and lets the industry handle some of those specifics.
So there's more trust in the industry to keep things safe and compliant,
Right.
while still having the flexibility to deal with the unique needs of LSAs.
You got it. But it's not a free-for-all.
Of course not.
The FAA still keeps an eye on things.
Mm-hmm.
And those industry consensus standards, especially the ones from ASTM International, provide a solid framework for safety and quality.
It sounds like a system that works well.
Well,
what about training for LSA maintenance? Are there different requirements?
yes. With traditional aircraft maintenance, you typically need an A&P license.
Okay.
But LSA maintenance offers something called task-specific training.
Task-specific training. What's that?
So let's say you need to overhaul a particular engine that's commonly used in LSAs.
Okay.
Instead of getting a full A&P license, which covers a wide range of aircraft systems, you can get training that focuses just on that engine.
So you're getting specialized training for a specific LSA maintenance task.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a more efficient approach, since LSAs often have simpler systems.
Makes sense. Who provides this task-specific training, though? Is it still FAA approved?
That's where things get interesting again.
Okay.
The FAA doesn't directly approve or regulate task-specific training for LSA maintenance.
Really?
Yep, they rely on the aircraft manufacturers or other recognized organizations in the industry to develop and deliver those training programs.
So the FAA is really trusting the industry to make sure people working on LSAs are properly trained.
They are. It's all about that collaboration we talked about.
Okay. What about documentation? Do you still have to fill out those detailed FAA forms for every repair or alteration on an LSA?
Actually, no. The documentation for LSAs is more streamlined. Remember that Form 337?
Yeah, the one for major repairs on regular aircraft?
Yep, you don't need it for LSAs.
Oh, interesting.
Instead, you just write a statement.
Okay.
Basically confirming that the aircraft still meets those ASTM standards.
After any major work is done. So it's about showing you meet those industry standards.
Right.
Not so much about filling out specific FAA paperwork. It's more focused on the outcome.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, here's another interesting thing about LSAs. The safety directives don't come from the FAA.
Yep.
They come from the aircraft manufacturers themselves.
That's right.
Really? So the manufacturers are basically in charge of keeping their own aircraft safe.
It's not exactly policing themselves.
Okay.
But they do have a bigger role in finding and fixing safety issues.
Yeah.
With their specific aircraft models.
Makes sense. They're the ones who know their aircraft the best.
Exactly. And they obviously want to make sure their products are safe.
So how do these manufacturer-issued safety directives work?
They're similar to the FAA's airworthiness directives.
Okay.
They tell you what inspections, repairs, or modifications you need to do to address specific safety concerns.
And they're just as important to follow.
Absolutely.
So it's a different approach.
Yeah.
But the goal is the same. Keep those LSAs airworthy and safe. That's exactly. Now let's talk about those maintenance records.
Okay.
We know they're often kept electronically these days.
Right. But what are the rules about how long you have to keep them and what happens to them when the aircraft is sold?
That's where 14 CFR Part 91 comes into play again.
Okay.
Specifically Section 91.4107.
Gotcha.
It covers the rules for keeping and transferring those maintenance records.
So Part 91 really is important for everyone involved with aircraft.
It is. It's like the Bible for record keeping.
I like that. So what does it say about maintenance records?
Well, it makes a clear distinction between temporary and permanent records.
Okay.
Temporary records.
Yeah.
Like those work orders for minor repairs. You got to keep those until the work is done, inspected, and approved.
Right.
Basically until the aircraft is good to fly again.
So you can't just toss those work orders out as soon as you finish a repair?
Nope. Got to keep them for a bit.
Okay. What about those permanent records? What are those and how long do you keep them?
Permanent records are basically the story of an aircraft's maintenance.
Oh.
They include all those logbook entries for maintenance and inspections, info about any life-limited parts, and any forms for major repairs or alterations.
Gotcha. Anything that helps you understand the aircraft's maintenance history.
Exactly. And Part 91 says that owners have to keep those permanent records as long as they own the aircraft.
So they stay with the aircraft for its entire life.
That's right. They're a crucial part of the aircraft documentation.
Makes sense. What happens when the aircraft is sold, though?
When you sell an aircraft, those permanent records go with it to the new owner.
So it's like passing on a family heirloom, but instead of a precious object?
It's a detailed history of all the maintenance that's been done.
So the new owner knows exactly what's been done to the aircraft.
Right.
which is super important for making decisions about its future care.
Exactly. What if the previous owner wants to hold on to those original records, though?
Okay.
Maybe for sentimental reasons. Or they're worried about losing them. Part 91 allows for that, but there's a catch.
What's that?
They can keep the physical copies, but they have to give them to the new owner, or the FAA, or the NTSB if they're asked for.
So it's like a long-term loan?
Yeah.
Making sure those records are available if anyone needs them?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It balances the previous owner's wishes with the need to keep those records accessible.
This has been great. We talked to SFRs. Those old CAMs, electronic record keeping, and how important it is to keep those maintenance records.
Absolutely.
Essential stuff.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
But there's one more area we need to explore.
Okay.
Those publications that can help us navigate all these aviation regulations and provide guidance on aircraft maintenance.
Those are really helpful.
So stay tuned for part 3 of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Where we'll unlock the secrets of those helpful publications.
Including FAA handbooks and manuals, industry standards like ATA iSpec 2200, and those insightful ASTM publications.
Looking forward to it.
Until then, keep those wings level.
You got it.
And your knowledge soaring.
Absolutely.
Welcome back. We've spent the last 2 parts of this deep dive, really exploring this whole world of aviation regulations.
Yeah, it's
from those basic AFARs to those unique SFRs. And of course, how important it is to keep good records.
Definitely.
But regulations are just one part of the picture, right?
Right, absolutely. There are tons of publications out there that can help you understand those regulations and give you a deeper understanding of how to do aircraft maintenance the right way.
So it's like having a cheat sheet for the aviation world.
Kind of like that.
Where do we even begin with all of this?
Well, a good place to start is with the publications that the FAA puts out.
Okay.
They've got something for just about everyone. Pilots, mechanics, air traffic controllers, even aviation medical examiners.
It's like a whole library dedicated to aviation.
You got it. And they cover so many different topics.
I bet.
And they're constantly updating them to make sure they reflect the latest rules and technology.
So if I'm looking for detailed information on something specific, like let's say inspecting an aircraft's fuel system or doing weight and balance calculations, the FAA has a publication for that.
Absolutely. They have these handbooks that go into incredible depth on all sorts of topics.
So for those of us who work on aircraft, what are some of the essential FAA publications we should check out?
The Aviation Maintenance Technician Handbook series is a must-have.
Okay.
There's a general handbook that covers all the basics, and then separate handbooks for airframe mechanics and power plant mechanics.
Okay.
They're like the ultimate guide to aircraft maintenance, covering everything from the tools and materials to how to troubleshoot and fix things.
So whether you're a seasoned mechanic or just starting out, these handbooks are super valuable.
Definitely. And the FAA doesn't just focus on mechanics.
Oh, right.
They have handbooks for other aviation professionals, too.
Like who?
Like they have a parachute rigger handbook.
Oh, wow.
That covers everything you need to know about parachutes. From packing techniques to how to inspect them.
Wow. They really have thought of everything. What about publications from the aviation industry itself?
Yeah.
Are there any big ones we should be aware of?
One of the most important is ATA iSpec 2200.
Okay.
Remember those ATA codes we talked about?
Right, the ones that categorize all the different maintenance tasks.
Exactly. ATA iSpec 2200 defines those codes and creates a standardized way to organize and share maintenance information.
So it's like a universal language for aircraft maintenance.
You got it. And make sure everyone's on the same page.
Okay.
From the manufacturers to the airlines to the maintenance shops.
So if you're working on an aircraft, knowing ATA iSpec 2200 is crucial for clear communication.
Absolutely. It's all about speaking the same language and doing things consistently.
What other industry publications should we check out?
Aircraft manufacturers themselves put out a lot of information, including those detailed maintenance manuals we talked about.
Right.
And then there's ASTM International. They develop those industry consensus standards.
Yeah, the ones that play a big role in LSA maintenance.
Exactly. ASTM creates standards for tons of different industries, including aviation. Their publications cover everything, from what materials to use to how to test them to guidelines for maintenance.
So if I'm looking for the best guidance on a specific part of aircraft maintenance, I should check out ASTM publications.
Absolutely. They're a great resource.
Cool. This has been an incredible journey.
It has been.
Through all these aviation regulations and the publications that help us understand them.
Definitely.
The biggest thing I've learned is that you always have to keep learning in this field.
Absolutely. Aviation is always changing, with new technologies and regulations popping up all the time.
It can be hard to keep up.
It can, but it's so important to stay informed.
Okay, so where can we go to keep learning?
Well, besides the publications we talked about, there are tons of specialized resources out there focusing on specific aircraft types, systems, or maintenance techniques.
Okay.
And don't forget about online resources.
Right.
The FAA website is full of information. And there are all kinds of aviation forums and websites where you can connect with other maintenance professionals and get your questions answered.
It's like we've opened the door to a whole world of aviation knowledge.
Exactly. The learning never stops in this field.
Right.
Stay curious and keep those wings level.
I like it. And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into this fascinating world of aviation regulations.
It's been a great discussion.
We hope you found it informative and engaging.
Yeah.
And maybe even a little bit inspiring. Until next time.
Yeah.
Happy flying.
You too.
And keep those logbooks up to date.
Absolutely.